A story goes, the winter wind cut through the bustling streets of Manhattan, so biting that passers-by pulled their coats tighter, hands retreating into their pockets as if to escape the numbing cold. Donald Trump, wrapped in a dark overcoat, strode firmly amid his security detail. His eyes scanned the streets, his gaze probing, as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. Today, instead of sitting in the warmth of his usual motorcade, he chose to walk the city, driven by an inexplicable urge to immerse himself in its raw, unscripted rhythm. If you enjoy inspiring and captivating stories, please support us by subscribing to our channel, liking, sharing, and leaving a comment below. Wishing you a joyful and peaceful day. As Trump turned into a narrow alleyway, his steps slowed. His gaze landed on a man slumped against a cold stone wall. A tattered military jacket draped over the man's shoulders. Its once proud green faded into a weary shade of gray, worn thin by time and weather. At his feet lay a cardboard sign with a scrawled plea, "Veteran in need of help." Trump stopped. His brows knit slightly, and his gloved hand instinctively tightened. He signaled for his security team to step back, then took slow, deliberate steps toward the man. The crunch of his shoes on the salt-scattered pavement echoed in the unusual stillness of the alley. The man looked up, his sunken eyes a blend of fatigue and quiet defiance. His posture straightened slightly, as if refusing to let vulnerability show. "Who are you?" the man rasped, his voice like gravel tumbling in his throat. Trump didn't answer right away. He crouched to the man's level, extending his hand with calm intent. "What's your name?" His voice was steady, a bridge reaching across two vastly different worlds. The man hesitated, his gaze flickering to Trump's outstretched hand, as if questioning the sincerity behind the gesture. Finally, he took it, his grip slow but firm, and pushed himself to stand, his back slightly bent from years of hardship. "Jack Miller," he said, his voice gravelly but resolute. "Former Marine." Trump repeated the name, as if etching it into memory. "Jack, you look like you've been through a lot." Jack let out a dry laugh, the sound dissipating into the wind. "More than I'd care to remember, sir. But everyone has their cross to bear." Trump stayed silent for a moment, his eyes drifting to the faint metals pinned to Jack's jacket. "You're a veteran?" he asked, his tone deliberate, weighted. Jack nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his tired face, though he seemed to try to suppress it. "Afghanistan. A few tours. We did things I'll never make peace with, but we did them for our country." The wind howled through the alley, carrying the distant sound of honking cars. Trump stood motionless, the man's words hanging heavy in the cold air. "Why are you here, Jack?" he asked, his voice low but pressing. Jack lowered his head, his gloved hands clenching together. "I lost my way after I came back. Jobs were hard to hold, my health declined, and the system doesn't work the way you think. Not until you're the one on the outside." Trump nodded slowly, his gaze seeming to pierce the invisible barrier between himself and Jack. "What unit were you in?" "Bravo Company, sir. 3rd Battalion. We were in Kandahar, back in the early days." Trump froze, his eyes widening slightly. "Bravo Company? You were the ones who did the impossible. They called you the Ghost Team." Jack stiffened, his posture instinctively straightening at the mention. A fleeting look of pride crossed his face before reality brought it crashing down. "Yeah, we were good," he said, his voice fading. "But it all disappeared when we came back." The two men stood there, the winter wind swirling around them, as if erasing all other sounds from the city. Trump looked at Jack for a long moment, then spoke, his voice firm and resolute. "Come with me, Jack. You don't belong here." Jack looked up, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. But when he met Trump's gaze, he saw something genuine, an invitation without strings attached. His pride made him hesitate, but in the end, he nodded. A few days later, Jack was accommodated at a nearby hotel, arranged by Trump to ensure his privacy. One quiet morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains of the hotel room, Trump sat across from Jack in a secluded corner. The warmth from their coffee cups filled the air between them, dispelling the lingering chill of winter. Leaning slightly forward, Trump clasped his hands on the table. "Jack, I want to do something for you. Not just a room or a few meals. I want people to know about Bravo Company, about what you and your team have done, so they can understand your sacrifice." Jack lowered his head, his calloused hands gripping the coffee cup tightly. The steam rose to his face, but it couldn't melt the weight etched into his eyes. "I don't know, sir. Most of those memories should stay where they belong. People don't want to hear about what we did." Trump remained silent for a moment, his gaze steady on Jack. Finally, he shook his head, his voice firm but calm. Not just for them, Jack. For you. You stepped into danger so that the rest of us could live in peace. That kind of courage should never be buried. Jack looked up, his unfocused eyes gradually sharpening as they met Trump's. He studied Trump's face, as if searching for the truth behind his words. A moment passed, the air between them heavy with unspoken understanding. Jack exhaled deeply and gave a slight nod. He said nothing, but the quiet acceptance in his gesture spoke volumes. In the days that followed, Trump's team worked discreetly to organize an event. Private calls were made to reach out to Jack's former unit members. Some were surprised, others deeply moved, but all agreed to attend, bringing with them their own stories and scars, both visible and hidden. On the day of the ceremony, Jack was brought to the White House. As he walked through the grounds, his steps slowed. His eyes swept over the scene before him, as though he couldn't believe what was unfolding. The simple suit he wore hugged his lean frame, and the hesitation in his every step was evident in the way his hands tightened and released at his sides. Trump stood at the entrance, his expression softening with relief as he saw Jack arrive. He said nothing, only gave a brief nod, a gesture brimming with respect, prompting Jack to take a deep breath, steadying himself. Inside, the atmosphere was solemn and dignified. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, and the light from grand chandeliers cast a warm yet stately glow over the room. As Jack entered, chairs shifted quietly. His former comrades rose to their feet, saluting him in unison. A few had eyes that shimmered with unshed tears, while others maintained a firm, stoic demeanor that carried a depth of unspoken emotion. Trump stepped onto the stage, his hand gripping the podium firmly, as if to channel strength into every word he was about to deliver. Today, we honor an extraordinary individual, Jack Miller, and the entirety of Bravo Company. They have done the unimaginable to protect us. Their sacrifices deserve recognition, not only for the battles they faced, but for the resilience they have shown in confronting the wounds no one can see. The room fell silent. The only sound was the measured breathing of those listening intently. Trump's voice deepened, his tone filled with gravity as he continued. Heroes come in many forms, but those who not only fight on the battlefield, but also weather the storms within their own souls, are the ones who truly deserve to be called heroes. Trump gestured, inviting Jack to step onto the stage. Jack rose to his feet, his steps heavy with emotion. As he made his way to the center of the room, thunderous applause erupted, echoing endlessly. A few veterans raised their hands in a military salute, while others bowed their heads in silent respect. Jack stood there, his breathing slightly uneven, but his gaze was clear and unwavering. In that moment, he was no longer just a veteran. He was a symbol of courage and resilience. Trump carefully opened a velvet box, revealing a gleaming medal, exquisitely crafted. Though small, it carried the weight of immeasurable gratitude. He approached Jack, his hands steady yet reverent as he draped the medal around Jack's neck. Trump spoke, his voice low and deliberate, each word carving into the stillness of the room. Jack, for your service, your bravery, and your sacrifice, we honor you. You are a hero, not just to me but to everyone here. Jack didn't respond immediately. His body remained still, as if bracing to contain something too powerful to let loose. His eyes flickered, and his rough hands instinctively clenched together. Slowly, his eyes filled with tears. The hardened lines of his weathered face softened, revealing a profound gratitude that had long been buried. His chest rose and fell deeply, as though he were drawing in all the air he could to steady himself in the overwhelming moment. Standing tall, Trump scanned the room with his eyes. Clearing his throat, he shifted his gaze from Jack to the audience. Today is not just a day of celebration. It is the beginning of a greater commitment, a promise that veterans like Jack will never again feel alone, abandoned, or forgotten. The room fell utterly silent, all eyes fixed on Trump, his voice resonating with clarity. He outlined a comprehensive initiative, including support for healthcare, employment opportunities, and housing for veterans. He announced the establishment of a new fund named Bravo Company, a tribute to the soldiers who had sacrificed quietly for the nation. Everyone listened intently, some bowing their heads as their eyes shimmered with emotion. Jack, standing beside Trump, closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a trembling breath as though the cracks in his spirit were slowly being mended. When the ceremony concluded, the applause continued to echo as if reluctant to fade. Other veterans approached Jack, shaking his hand, some patting him gently on the shoulder. offering salutes filled with deep respect. Jack didn't say much, only nodding and gripping their hands firmly, his eyes brimming with an unspoken gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Jack's life took an unexpected turn. He began attending events, sharing his story as a representative for veterans. At first, the stage lights unsettled him. Jack often clutched the edges of the podium, his eyes darting nervously across the crowd before he started speaking. But once his raspy voice broke the silence, the raw sincerity in his words captivated everyone. He spoke of brotherhood, harrowing battles, and the invisible wounds he and his comrades carried home. Gradually, Jack grew more confident. Each time he stepped onto a stage, he felt a renewed strength. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for thousands of veterans still grappling with the shadows within their minds. One day, Jack received an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Honor Gala. As he read the letter, his hands trembled slightly. This was the largest event he had ever been invited to, and knowing that Trump would be present only added to the pressure. After a moment of hesitation, Jack drew a deep breath and nodded to himself. He knew he couldn't decline. On the night of the gala, the venue sparkled with dazzling chandeliers. Jack entered, his tailored suit lending him an air of dignity. Each step he took felt weighted, not just by the significance of the event, but by the responsibility he now bore. Eyes followed him across the room. Some recognized him from articles, while others were simply curious about the story of this veteran who had captured the nation's attention. As Jack stepped onto the stage, his pace slowed slightly. The pounding of his heart seemed to echo the bright lights glaring into his eyes, making everything ahead of him blur. He gripped the edge of the podium lightly, his head bowing just a bit as if to regain his balance. From the front row, Trump smiled at him, his nod of encouragement like an anchor steadying Jack. Jack took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and slowly falling. His voice broke the silence, deep and warm but tinged with a slight tremor at first. Today, I stand before you not as a hero, but as a man who almost lost himself. He paused, raising his head to look out at the audience, his eyes now bright with a determination that was difficult to describe. I returned from the battlefield, thinking I had won, but I realized the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The fight doesn't end when the guns go silent. It continues in the quiet moments, in the solitude, and in the struggle to find purpose again. An unusual stillness enveloped the room. No one moved. Every gaze was fixed on Jack. He swallowed hard, his hand tightening slightly on the podium, but his voice grew stronger as he went on. For years, I wandered as a stranger in my own country, unseen and forgotten. I was ready to give up, to disappear into the shadows of this city. But one day, someone stopped and looked at me, not as a stranger, but as a human being. Jack paused again, drawing in a deep breath to steady the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. His hands released the podium, his eyes sweeping across the crowd before returning to the front row. That person was President Trump, and because of him, I stand here today, not as a lost soldier, but as a proud veteran with a renewed purpose. Trump, seated below, gave a slight nod. His eyes glistened, his expression a mix of pride and humility. Jack took a moment, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, trembling slightly. Then, lifting his head high, his voice carried a newfound strength. But tonight isn't just about me, Jack said, his words ringing out with power. Tonight is about countless men and women who have given everything for this country, only to return and face a different battle. It's about the families who have stood by them, the communities that must embrace them, and a nation that must never forget them. I am here as a reminder that no veteran should ever feel forgotten. The room erupted in applause. Many people rose to their feet, some placing a hand gently over their hearts, while others couldn't hold back the tears streaming down their faces. As Jack stepped down from the stage, his shoulders relaxed slightly. His eyes met the admiring gazes of people from all corners of the room. Trump walked onto the stage, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder as though to pass on his strength. His voice resonated clearly, imbued with emotion. Jack's story is one of incredible power. It reminds all of us of the responsibility we have to those who have protected us. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience before continuing, his words etching themselves deeply into the minds of those listening. Today, I am announcing a new commitment, the creation of a Veterans Support Fund, led by Jack himself. This fund will provide veterans with the resources they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. From housing and mental health support to job training, no veteran will be left behind. Trump's announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the room. The applause swelled, yet all eyes remained on Jack, the man standing there with an expression of stunned gratitude and profound appreciation. In that moment, Jack wasn't just a veteran. He was a symbol of hope and renewal. After the ceremony, people approached Jack one by one to shake his hand. Some gripped his hand tightly, their eyes filled with profound respect. Each handshake, each word of gratitude, felt like a balm soothing the wounds he had carried for so many years. In the months that followed, the support fund under Jack's leadership grew rapidly. He frequently visited veteran centers, shaking hands with each individual, his gaze steady and unwavering as he listened to their stories. Every time he stood before a crowd, Jack held the microphone firmly, his hands trembling slightly but his voice unwaveringly strong. He advocated for new policies, his words cutting through the layers of indifference like a sharp blade. When he saw veterans beginning to smile again, their once burdened shoulders easing, Jack felt a profound warmth fill him. Each night, he returned home and looked in the mirror. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of exhaustion, but the emptiness of those lonely years was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. The support fund was no longer just a charity. Veterans who sought its help came not only for assistance, but to rediscover themselves. Jack witnessed once dim eyes light up with hope and hands that had clenched in worry now extending openly to seize opportunities. The fund became a movement, a symbol of hope and recognition that those who had dedicated their lives to the country deserved far more than a token handshake. Each time Jack thought back to that fateful day in the narrow alley, it felt as though a cold draft swept through his chest. The image of a stranger extending a hand, his warm gaze cutting through the biting winter cold, remained etched in Jack's mind. That moment had changed everything, not just for him, but for hundreds of other veterans. It didn't just save his life. It awakened within him a profound purpose. As for Trump, he occasionally attended fund events, quietly sitting in the back row. Trump didn't speak much, but his eyes always followed Jack, and a faint, satisfied smile would cross his lips. In those moments, he saw a rebirth, not just of one man, but of an entire community. Trump understood deeply that the hand he extended that day had sparked a legacy far greater than he could have imagined. For Jack, his story had become a beacon for other lost veterans. Over the years, he steadfastly guided the fund, traveling to meet people and witnessing lives transformed. The light of that legacy illuminated not only the present but also spread into the future, inspiring generations to honor those who served with the respect and gratitude they rightfully deserved. What do you think? How can kindness and recognition help heal even the deepest wounds? Share your thoughts. Sometimes, even a small idea can ignite a powerful flame of change.